So let's listen to this clip they put together, and then I'll introduce our panel.
So we can't simply say we might fire a couple of tactical nuclear weapons and that would change international relations. Yes, it would, but it would change it against Russia.
There's an alarming number of people who are casually advocating for the use of nuclear weapons. Mitt Romney recently wrote an op-ed for the New York Times where he nonchalantly explores the possibility of destroying Russia's entire military, but he's not alone. Seth Cropsey, a decades-long high-level Pentagon official, published an op-ed titled, "The United States Should Show It Can Win a Nuclear War." As if it's possible to win a nuclear war. The Wall Street Journal editorial board endorsed a plan put forward by a member of the Atlantic Council to use tactical nuclear weapons against Russia. It's not just Russia either. Joe Biden recently announced that the US would militarily intervene if China tries to reunify with Taiwan, which would pretty much be the most surefire way of starting World War III. Hearing all this, we here at Breakthrough News wanted to remind people what nuclear war would actually entail. So I'm going to be reading from different simulations that scientists have conducted which go over possible scenarios in a nuclear conflict. So this first scenario simulates a single nuclear weapon with a 200 kiloton yield being dropped on a military base in northern Italy. This bomb would immediately kill 10 to 20,000 people, but what's even deadlier than the blast itself is the nuclear fallout that would follow, so wind that spreads radioactive particles across the region. This cloud of particles would reach as far as Poland in 48 hours. And it's estimated that this fallout would kill up to 70,000 people. But it's unlikely that a country that gets hit with a nuclear weapon won't respond. So this second scenario examines the impact that a regional nuclear war would have on the world. In this case, they look at a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. This second scenario assumes that these two countries are dropping 100 nuclear weapons with 15 kiloton yields on each other's cities and industrial centers. So in this case, 20 million people would die immediately. But as the cities burn, a massive smoke cloud would develop and cover every continent within 2 weeks. This cloud would block sunlight and cause temperatures to plummet to their lowest levels in over 1,000 years, which would decimate crops. On top of this, rainfall would reduce, which would deepen the food shortage. The smoke would trap heat in the stratosphere and raise temperatures by 50 degrees Celsius. This would drastically diminish the ozone layer, making several parts of the Earth uninhabitable. All in all, over 1 billion people would die of starvation in this scenario, while the rest of us would live in a virtual hell on Earth. Right now, you have politicians saying things like, the decision to use nuclear weapons is the sovereign right of the United States and no country can tell us not to. Let's take a moment to appreciate what they're saying here. They're saying the United States has the absolute right to end life on this planet whenever they see fit. These are the same people that pay lip service every time there's a school shooting or every time another innocent person is killed by police, but it's obvious that they never cared. And their nonchalant attitude towards a global nuclear apocalypse proves this.
So we can't.
They always do great work there over at Breakthrough News. Let's go ahead and bring up our guest. I'm going to start. Actually, I'm going to put everybody on screen, and then we'll have each of you introduce yourselves. So let's go 1, 2, 3. Oh, maybe I should take the video out. That would help. Sorry about that. Let me take the video out. 4, 5. JB is just here listening, and one more. So I'm going to put myself at the bottom so that everybody will be seen evenly. So welcome. Let me make sure I got everybody in here. Yes. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to start with the two that were originally on this panel, and then the 4 great additions to this panel we'll introduce. So let's start with Tara. How are you doing, Tara?
I'm good. Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. And Afeni, what's up, Afeni?
I'm doing well. Really excited to be here. Hi, Tara. Hi, everybody. How you guys doing?
What is that a flag of behind you, by the way?
This is a DC flag.
Okay, right on. All right. So let's go to the additions. I'm gonna go to Jason because I know Jason. I know Jason. So Jason, what's up, Jason? How you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Very much appreciate the invitation to speak here. As you know, this is one of my big passions. I've been an anti-war activist for over 30 years. So I'm very interested in today's topic. I think there's a lot of good stuff to talk about, and I think the video you just presented was fantastic. So thank you for that.
Like I said, there's a lot of footage, and I got a lot of this from your some of your pages, your profiles on Twitter is where I got some of this content. Let's go to Tib. Is it Tib? T-I-B? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, that's how I say it.
For our audience that may not have seen you on a stream of ours, can you just briefly introduce who you are? I'm told you're a veteran or you're an active.
Yeah, I'm a veteran, actually.
Okay.
Caveat, still active duty, not too much longer. I'm old. I look old, but I'm even older than you think. But been going on 18 years. I'm in the, I guess what quote unquote people think of the nice service, like Air Force, but they are by far the most devastating when they really want to be, because they're like I call them the Silicon Valley service. Like they're the ones who are great at packaging stuff and not being as, I guess, terse as the Marines and the Army. Navy's kind of up there with us, being very nice and politically tactful how they say stuff. But make no mistake, some of our leaders are very much the same psychopathic tendencies. But I'm a veteran. I actually am in a safety career so and I've been around it, afforded me an opportunity to travel around to the bases. So I've seen a few different things, talked to a lot of different people. Job has me interfacing with a lot of people from a lot of different career fields. And I can tell you, there's some people out there who when you see that stuff like that and you think can't believe people are actually swallowing this. There are people who will spot it to you wholeheartedly. And thank you for the opportunity to come on here and speak.
Absolutely. And I'll go to, is it Geoff or Jeff, or is it Geoff?
It's Jeff, like Jeff.
Okay. Hey, Jeff, welcome to RBN. Great to meet you. Can you tell us who you are and just sort of a little bit of your background, tips?
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
I'm the Democratic nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives in Kentucky's 6th Congressional District.
Mm-hmm.
I've run several times before and never got past a primary. So this is the first time I've actually won a primary. And I've been a member of the anti-war movement, anti-imperialism for the last 45 years or so.
Wow.
Absolutely. That was a great video introducing this segment.
Yes, and like I said, Breakthrough News, I had to pick between that and a couple of other good ones they had. And last but certainly not least, now I left you last because I want to pronounce your name correctly, and I don't want to say it the wrong way. So can you pronounce your name for me so I can say it the right way from now on? Let's see. Nakuzila. I think I got it. How are you?
Almost there. It's Zola, but you can call me Zola.
Zola.
I'm from South Africa. Yes. It's Zola because of African with Xhosa and Zulu. So yes.
Okay.
But you can call me Zola. I'm an award-winning South African activist. I've been in the activism space for quite a few years.
I think you're muted.
Can you say something? It doesn't show mute on my screen. Now I can hear you a little bit. That's a little bit better? Yeah. Okay, can you? Oh, there we go. Now it's completely clear. There you go.
Okay. My name is Zola Ndwandwe. I'm a South African activist. I'm an award-winning South African activist. I've been in the activism space for quite a while now. fighting for menstrual rights, civil rights, for the advancement of women's rights in terms of eradicating period poverty and eradicating, anything that's against the rights of young girls and women. And I firmly stand by Nelson Mandela's values when it comes to fighting for a revolution and fighting for change, in that it needs to be peaceful. They need to be non-violent. We led a peaceful protest calling on the South African government to adopt transformative policies in terms of advancing human rights, which involve women's rights. And so when it comes to anti-war, I'm very strongly agree in that when it comes to fighting for transformation, it needs to be peaceful. It needs to take into account, the environment, to take into account the people, especially because, climate change also has an impact on the living conditions, particularly when it comes to the marginalized, and that involves predominantly Black people globally. And so I feel that the whole notion on nuclear weapons in terms of, fighting for peace amongst nations is it's a human rights violation. It's against, advocating for the right to life, for the right to human life, and for progress and peace and resolution amongst nations, particularly the current ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We need to be very concerned about protecting human life more than just, advancing the cause of politicians with their ego-driven agendas. And so I believe that nuclear weapons should be a thing of the past. It shouldn't be implemented in the first place. It shouldn't be a discussion in the first place. And yes, thank you so much for having me on the panel.
No, that was wonderful, and thank you for sharing that with the panel and with our audience. So let's just continue in that same vein, where she's kind of describing, like what she's fighting for, why she's in this fight, the sort of destruction that this sort of ruling class, warmongering, capitalist class is marching us towards nuclear war. So let's give everybody a few minutes to kind of just speak on that. Also, let's start with Tara. So if you could also, I know this is an added question. I didn't have that, but just based off what Zola was saying, this is something I do want to hear all of you kind of your point of view, just, the wide, broad, what's happening, and then why you're at the place and what you're seeing. For me, like, it's just a insane uptick in war propaganda that it doesn't resemble anything I've seen. And I'm older too. I mean, you can see it in my gray. It just doesn't resemble anything that I've seen in a while. And that's what's really, really concerning with me. And I do have a video to share later, but let's start with Tara, then we'll go to Jason, then Afeni. Just to kind of I'll give each of you a couple of minutes just to give you broadly, why are you an anti-war activist? What brings you to this place? What are you fighting for? What are the stakes? That sort of thing. So let's start with Tara.
Hi, I'm Tara Reid. I authored the book Left Out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In. I also have the podcast, The Politics of Survival, and recently had Wyatt Reid, a journalist who was almost killed in Ukraine, in the Donbass region, when he arrived, because he covers, he's, basically not doing the State Department talking points. He's on the Ukraine military kill list. And he did a WhatsApp message to a colleague to let him know, hey, I'm here safe. This is my location. An hour later, his hotel was bombed. He literally was just down the street walking towards it when it was hit. I also had Ava Bartlett on, same thing. She's on the Ukraine military kill list. Her hotel was bombed. So the bigger overarching issue, and I think Zola touched on this with politicians' egos, is the U.S. and NATO is fighting a proxy war against Russia using Ukraine. They only want one message. That's why you're seeing all the censorship. The Ukraine military kill list that has journalists on it that are trying to give balance and cover, from another lens rather than just the Department of Defense lens, are being threatened with their lives, having their, bank accounts frozen, issued sanctions, threatened with prison, as the case in Alina Lip. And I feel passionately about lifting these investigative reporters that are trying to tell us the truth about Ukraine, because we're not even getting the truth about what's happening as far as human rights violations and what the Ukraine military is doing. Even those NAFO trolls that you see, the little dog things called the North Atlantic Fellows Organization that pounces on anyone that's anti-war, that's being funded by a neo-Nazi out of Poland. And it's the charity that they're doing and the money that they're raising with that troll farm that, by the way, a congressman is using of the U.S. Congress, is actually funding the Belgium Legion, which is a neo-Nazi battalion in Ukraine committing horrific war crimes. Max Blumenthal did a great expose on this in the Gray Zone. So the reason I'm involved is back when I came forward about the corruption, about Joe Biden working for him, the horrible thing that happened to me. I also said in an interview in 2020 that if Joe Biden were elected, he would most likely start a war with Russia. And I was told at the time, not to say things like that, but it's the truth. I know the people around him. And the problem is the people around him actually think that a limited nuclear war is possible. People like Michael McFaul, people like that are behind the scenes that are driving this. Now, the Atlantic Council, so the Atlantic, the magazine, like Edward Isaac Dovier, people like that behind the scenes. And then, of course, people in the administration directly working with Biden. And so right now we're at a very precarious time where there could be a false flag. But what they're not taking into account is mistakes, accidents, or triggering another nuclear conflict in another part of the world by this happening. Pushing Russia to the brink, which NATO has done for 20 years, getting closer and closer on the border. And then yesterday, CBS News just reported, and probably Tibbs can probably talk a little bit about this, they've just deployed U.S. military to Romania. For the first time, U.S. soldiers are looking at are going to be in Europe since World War II, and they're kind of crowing it on in the mainstream media. So my mother was an anti-war activist with Vietnam. I've always had strong feelings about anti-war and the military-industrial complex that's benefiting just the weapons manufacturers and a few politicians, while civilians suffer and die. And here we are, this proxy war, poised to give $50 billion in January more to Ukraine. It'll be a total of $800 billion collectively between NATO and US, and there's been no accounting for this. So I have feelings about all of this, of course, being an anti-war movement, but I really want to talk about too, and I really want to highlight the complicity of the Western media furthering the war, and basically enabling the message of the State Department and giving no balance and censoring, deplatforming, banning RT, anyone who gives a different perspective than British and American intelligence. So I hope that adequately answered that question.
That did, and it was very, very informative. And in the video I just brought up was just to back up what you were saying. That is the CBS report. We'll play it in a little bit, talking about the deployment that you just described. I believe.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing, just one more thought.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. Congress has not declared war. Joe Biden is manufacturing citizens' consent for a proxy war against Russia, now a hot war, and then possibly one against China, which you've touched on earlier. So we may be looking at a possibility of two major confrontations with two world powers with nuclear weapons. So yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
This is just insane. But let's bring in Jason and then Afeni and then Jeff. What say you, Jason? Just broadly talk about the reason you are anti-war and the destruction that you believe in, and all surrounding sort of topics related.
So just briefly, I mean, I first protested war when I was 19 years old, when we went to Iraq for the first time. That was 1990. What got me into the anti-war movement was actually a recognition coming out of high school, right? So that was between my freshman and sophomore year in college when we went into Iraq the first time. Coming out of high school, raised in a Reagan Republican household, and my father was Air Force, growing up with that, watching us invade Grenada, watching all the stuff going on with the Iran-Contra, where hearing the mainstream narrative that is always anti-leftist, and then when I got into college and started hanging out in leftist circles, I realized that how much of what I grew up with from my family and from the media was propaganda, and of course, along with that was just the whole war machine as propaganda. That is always there are always weapons manufacturers trying to make money off of this thing, and that in the end it is the working class of wherever the war is happening that always gets hurt on the ground, and so we have seen that narrative. I protested war all through the Clinton administration, and certainly with the Bush administration, with the absolute outright criminality of the Bush administration that the New York Times and all mainstream media outlets just happily latched onto, and the cable news channels with their 24-hour news cycle. I mean, this is red meat for the culture that we have built in America that is very imperialist, that is, we're always sort of rah, we're number one, American global hegemony. I mean, people have written, about this, but, here we are, we're a country that spends 10 times more than the next person or next country on the military. And we can't even, here in our own country, we can't even provide health care to all people. So the narrative is imperialist. And I want to say this in regards to Russia and Ukraine. Like, we can sit here and we can say, listen, Vladimir Putin is an imperialist aggressor. I don't have a problem saying that Putin was an aggressor. But here's the deal. When we're talking about nuclear war that could be the end of all mankind, I mean, that's really, I don't care. I want to get to negotiations. We need to stop selling weapons. We need to stop fomenting conflict. Roger Wicker, senator from Mississippi, was talking about first strike before 3 months. This was in early December of 2021. He was already talking about first strike against Russia over Ukraine, and we were 3 months, 3 months out of any invasion at that point. So there are people behind the scenes that have really been ginning this thing up, what makes no sense to me is that, if we, for people who want to talk about Ukrainian sovereignty and integrity, I'm fine with that. I mean, that has to come. We have to get to negotiations at some point anyway. So let's put the guns down and talk about it right now. The people who are pushing the only way negotiations are ever going to happen is if Putin gets out of Russia. Well, I tell you what, that's probably not going to happen. Okay. So let's talk about what we actually can accomplish. And the first thing that we need to do is put the guns down. But there are obviously people pushing a narrative that is extremely, extremely dangerous. And again, the thing that people aren't thinking about is, if there is a nuclear conflict, the first people who are going to be hurt, the Ukrainians. I mean, that's happening on their soil. So, in light of what's happening with climate and the fact that the military is the 25th, if the U.S. military were a country, it would be the 25th biggest polluter in the world. There are massive fossil fuel interests here. There are massive strategic interests here, and none of it none of it is geared towards people actually putting their guns down. It is a proxy war against Russia. And over and over and over again through my 30 plus, going back 35, 40 years since I've been paying attention, there's always a war machine narrative that is pushed, and we have to speak out about it. And I would encourage everybody to listen to Katie Halper's most recent podcast. She had Medea Benjamin on. Medea spoke fantastically about what is going on right now. But we have to get to negotiations. I mean, if we push towards nuclear war, I don't care who's right. I don't care. If we push towards nuclear war, we're really talking about the end of mankind. Our existence is precarious enough as it is right now with climate change. I don't understand.
For the same reason, though, just a different way. That's weird how it is. It's the same people that's causing both. That's spending all the money and bombing and doing both. That's what's so weird, Jason. But go ahead and continue.
No, I've said.
Oh, you were there.
What I wanted to say. I'm going to leave it right there. Nuclear war is madness. It's all over. We need to be. We have lost our nuclear disarmament movement somewhere along the way, and we need to revitalize the nuclear disarmament movement globally.
Okay, and let's bring it in. And Jason, are you a vet? I just want to make sure anybody who's a veteran. I want to make sure Are you a veteran, Jason?
I am not. I'm not. No.
Okay, I know Afeni is. So Afeni, you're a veteran. Can you kind of talk about the same sort of things? Why are you anti-war? And is there something about your experience that gives you a different window to this, or had your eyes open earlier than a lot of people about this war, about war and war propaganda? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one thing that a lot of people don't know about me is not only am I a veteran, but I'm also an Army brat. My family is a military family, so I've seen the effects that the military had on my family, individually. So I never really wanted to join in the first place, to be honest. But I had to, and I did. And the reason why I'm anti-war now is because, the empire lies. The empire lies, and it manufactures consent. As was brought up, it's already been brought up here today that, they're trying to start a conflict with China. And China is mad that Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan. Why is China pissed off that Nancy Pelosi is going to fucking Taiwan? It's because Taiwan was used as a military base. They used Taiwan to invade China and to launch military offensives from there for a whole year. There were 30,000 U.S. soldiers stationed in Taiwan. So when the One China Agreement was agreed to, when everybody sat to the table and everybody agreed to that, that is the reason why. So that's the context that they don't give you. They tell us that we need to support this war in Ukraine. We need to give all this money to these people, but what they don't tell you, and they also say that this illegal annexation, what they're not telling you is that there's been a civil war that's been going on in the Ukraine for the past 8 years between Ukrainian Nazis, let's call a thing, and ethnic Russians that voted democratically to secede from Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So do we believe in sovereignty or not? Do we believe in democracy or not? You look at, we're invading Haiti right now. Mm-hmm. Their prime minister was assassinated sometime last year, and now we're saying, oh well, Haiti needs boots on the ground. Why do y'all say that Haiti needs help? Is it because Haiti owes France reparations for freeing itself 200 years ago? Is it because the IMF and the World Bank went into Haiti and planted eucalyptus trees and destroyed Haiti's fucking soil? Is it because they went and destroyed all the agriculture, destroyed all of the public institutions that they had built, and forced Haiti to become a country that relied on imports? That's the reason why I'm anti-war, because the empire lies. The U.S. spent $300 million per day, every day, for 20 years straight in Afghanistan, and we ain't get shit. Mm-hmm. Mind you, we're fighting terrorist groups that we funded, created, and trained. The Mujahideen turned into Al Qaeda. We were We were so big on Osama bin Laden when he was an anti-Soviet warrior back in the 1980s. We was giving him weapons. We were training those people.
Mhm.
So this is the reason why I'm anti-war, because every single time the U.S. says that, oh, we're doing this for this reason, we're trying to spread democracy and freedom. Every single time the U.S. puts boots on the ground in any country, shit gets worse. Shit gets worse. Afghanistan is worse off now than it would have ever been if the U.S. never invaded. People are starving, their infrastructure is destroyed, and what are we doing? We're sanctioning their fucking economy. Sanctions are warfare, by the way. So, like, I don't know. Like, they're telling us, so you can spend $300 million per day in Afghanistan, but you're telling me you can't afford healthcare. You're telling me that we cannot have every human being in this fucking country, whether they're a citizen or not, in a house with healthcare and a proper education. Is that what you're telling me? But we can give $50 billion to Ukrainian Nazi-led defense forces. Please get the fuck out of here. So that's
That's
the reason why.
That's exactly why.
Like
now
what
you
Afeni
said
was saying,
something.
you know, that like the ISIS thing, or like, you know, Iraq.
Go ahead.
Hilarious. Like, I could tell you a story about that. I could tell you a story directly linked to ISIS. Like,
tell that. Well, let me play this video, and then I'm gonna have you, because it's you're up next. But I do want to insert this because you mentioned the word sovereignty, and the State Department was asked this exact question using Ukraine, Russia, and Israel, Palestine. So let's listen to what the State Department had to say. Hopefully you can see all of the wording on the screen.
Palestinians and their supporters will argue that what you accuse Russia of doing in Ukraine in terms of war of aggression is very similar to what is going on in the occupied West Bank. And so I guess I'm trying to find what you find is different, because obviously Russia contests those allegations that you make against it, whether they're right or not. Israel contests the allegations that are being made against it in this report, and by others, including human rights groups that you cite repeatedly, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to other places. Is the difference that Ukraine is a sovereign state, in your view, and that Palestine is not?
That is a key difference. You point to some of what critics are saying. Look, no country is or should be immune from criticism. That, of course, includes Israel. Some of the criticism that we've heard, and we've, of course, offered our own over the course of recent months, is justified. Much of it is not. And so when you point to comparisons and criticisms, I think it is important to take a step back and to recognize the profound differences between those two situations. You mentioned one of them, and it is a paramount difference.
Well, listen, it's not me, the chairwoman of the Commission of Inquiry.
There are many assertions. There are many assertions around the world that are made.
She is the one who pointed out that just last week, 143 countries, including the United States and Israel, voted to condemn Russia for its actions. Not me. So sorry if you.
I know.
I'm repeating the point that she has made.
You're asking the question, and I'm making the point.
So that's the State Department's reaction. So Tib, you were going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I am injecting that video into the conversation. So if you want to comment on the video also, please do so. But Tib, what say you? You're also a veteran. I'm very curious about anti-war veterans. I'm very curious because you have a different perspective. My dad was one of them. He was a veteran, but he was staunchly anti-war, is all I remember growing up. But Tib, the floor is yours if you want to just touch upon any of those points.
So I actually have a very similar, I would say, background to Afeni. I'm actually an Army child, in and out Army brat. I joined the Air Force though, but my mom was in the Army. I lived in a few different states. Very majority of them were in the South. I'm from Texas originally, but my mom joined after I was born, so I wasn't born on army installation, but I lived so much like around them that it is a very core part of my being. I didn't become truly aware of how different the military like culture was until I was in high school, you know. And then here's something interesting also as well. Like, so I went to a military high school, not like uniforms, I mean, but it was actually on a military installation. And those are actually a little bit rarer now than you would imagine. So military has like their own, Department of Defense has like their own education service, DODEA. So my high school was a DODEA school. And you'd be surprised. The creatures are actually pretty well qualified, but I don't know what sort of contracts they have to sign when they become a teacher at our schools. But one of my classmates was General Petraeus' son. So I actually been to General Petraeus. Like we worked on projects together, and I didn't realize how influential this guy was. You know, I went to his house a few times, and when they talk about opulence and like the prince of the militaries, that's what they would call the generals. Like you definitely felt it being associated with these people. But I digress. So when it comes to anti-war for me, I knew something was amiss before when I did a particular deployment downrange to Iraq. I was doing convoys, and it was a logistics task force. So we weren't like out there to engage in combat, but we were there to move materials back. It was actually during 2009, 2010, Obama was in office. He wants to withdraw from Iraq. So one of our missions was, we have to count for all these vehicles across the entirety of Iraq. Iraq's a huge country. We couldn't account for all these vehicles. So whenever you do that, you have to do like this report of survey thing. And so, you know, we get back to headquarters, like, which is in Kuwait, and we're like, hey, we cannot find these vehicles. These are like nice vehicles, like Suburbans and just very nice vehicles made by GM and Ford and stuff like that. And the leadership was like, okay, put in a report, you know, route it up to us. And it makes it all the way. So eventually we find out it makes its way to the 3-star Army general who's in charge of like the Army Central. And he basically just writes it off. Like, this is millions of dollars worth of vehicles. So the reason I say this is because a few years later, what do we have manifest in Iraq? ISIS. And suddenly they're driving around in vehicles. And we're like, those vehicles look familiar. And it was just like, they literally had the vehicles that we should have did more work to account for. They're using them against us. And I mean, to drive it even home how bad of a job the military is at even accounting for stuff. There was a contractor vehicle, a plumbing contractor that we brought over, you know, from the States. You know, basically we tell the contractors like, yeah, we're gonna put you on a flight, you're gonna come home, you know, don't worry about your equipment, we're gonna get it back to you. We did not get it back to him. And this guy does a local interview, and he's like, that's my plumbing truck. They're using my plumbing truck. He literally still had the logo from his plumbing company, and they're running around, you know, attacking innocent Iraqis using vehicles and stuff. We provided them more means than just the weapons and stuff. We provided them the logistical means to move around that they did not have before. It gets,
and,
you know,
and taxpayers are paying for that. Taxpayers are paying for all of that, and they just write it off.
Yes, a general just
go ahead
with a pen signed it off. And I think just even when you go to a fiscal level of what we do in the military, you know, the Department of Defense was literally the only one who could not perform the self-audit that was mandated by Congress. And they literally said it. I think it might have been Panetta, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, and they're just like, can't account for all this money. And they were just like, literally the only of the executive departments. And they were just like, oh, well, you know, the Congress, and they just let them go, you know. And it just kind of goes back to what Tara's saying, you know, they're just, you know, blank checking money to this Ukraine conflict with no watchdog, you know. They want to watchdog everything else. I mean, you see how much of a stink they're making about student debt relief here, which is pennies.
Right.
pennies compared to what we spend on the DoD. Like when I tell you, like we break parts on planes that are cost like $800,000. We break them like every other day. Like we could easily spend like 10 to 10 million within 3 days. That's nothing. And like when you say that, people is just astounded, like are just flabbergasted, just the amount of waste, the amount of like hoovery that we have in the military, and it's a very sad thing. And it just it upsets me. Whenever I have the chance to go to these meetings with some of the higher ups, I say, hey, I think we should refrain from this. I try to give advice that sometimes a lot of times goes unheeded. And what really, I don't know how it was for Afeni, but for me as a veteran, what really got me was when I asked my leaders, like, what are we doing here? Like, I'm asking just a point blank, very direct question when I was in Iraq, when I went to Afghanistan. I was like, what are we doing here? This is after Saddam's gone. We caught Osama. Like, supposedly they have presidents now in their countries. This is, at this point, we're like, what are we doing here? And they just kind of give that, that crazy smile of like, they can't give you a real answer. They don't have an answer. Their bosses aren't giving them an answer. And it's just,
that's the kind of look you have when you're running up a bill. You know what I mean? When you're running up a bill, you're just give that kind of look like another steak, give me another porterhouse, That's it. That's the look you give. It's like
hands.
Yeah.
None of this has changed. If I can cut in for a second,
Sure.
I mentioned that my father was Air Force. I actually have a letter that he wrote in 1972 to his mother. He was an Air Force officer. And in the letter, he's telling my grandmother, none of us know why we're here. We're all just trying to stay alive at this point. And that was 50 years ago. I was a year old when he wrote that letter, and not a damn thing has changed. And the other thing I wanted to bring up about Afeni had talked about the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Adam Smith is the chair of House Armed Services. He's Washington's 9th district. Stephanie Gallardo ran against him, primaried him this year. And literally within 2 days of the invasion, we've got Adam Smith talking about the potential for arming 150, 200,000 Ukrainian troops in an ongoing fashion, essentially relating that to what we did with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. I mean, 40 years later, and it's almost exactly the same narrative. And when billions of dollars, talking about the waste, fraud, and abuse, when billions of dollars in cash literally disappeared in 2006, 2008, and Donald Rumsfeld says, we don't know where it went. The fact that the American people did not just riot at that point because we're having food stamps cut and heating assistance cut in the middle of the Hurricane Sandy, and people are voting against FEMA relief for a hurricane in New York while they are losing billions of dollars in Iraq. The fact that the American people did not riot at that point is beyond me. So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
No worries. And let's bring in Jeff. Just so we can. How much time do I got? Yeah, I got a good amount of time. Let's bring in Jeff, and then we're gonna open it up to where everybody can just kind of chime in if you want to chime in. So, Jeff, what I want to know from you've heard everybody speak and just sort of give their opinion. You said you've been anti-war for, I believe you said 40 plus years. Is there something you're seeing now that does it feel like it's intensified over the 40 years, or does it feel like it's at the same level to you?
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk about the next few months.
Absolutely.
What can activists do now faced with these incredibly urgent crises? So, I think you all have done a great job about saying how bad the situation is at the moment. I want to talk about the two big parties. I think ever since the end of World War II, 1945, the Republican Party has been, in its DNA, pro-war, pro-imperialism, reflexively anti-communist, anti-Soviet, and in the ethnic sense, anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, bigotry. I think the GOP is hopeless. I don't see them ever abandoning their support for the military-industrial complex and for more and more wars as long as the economy holds out. And even after it collapses, they're still going to be pushing for war. I think the Democratic Party was somewhat anti-war from about 1968 to 1973, during the height of the Vietnam War. We were a little bit anti-war, and then McGovern ran for president in 72, and the Democratic Party establishment basically abandoned him, didn't support him, and Richard Nixon won a second term. But he didn't serve his whole second term. He was impeached over Watergate trivia. So we were anti-war at one time, and one of my main objectives in running for Congress is to make the Democratic Party anti-war again. Right now, the two parties on Ukraine are just identical. They're all voting for billions of dollars that we need here again and again. And the Democratic Party is as bad as the Republicans at this particular moment. So if I get to Washington, I want to bring back impeachment of all kinds of people. For example, the 6 U.S. Supreme Court so-called justices who overturned Roe v. Wade. I think all 6 should be impeached. And we'll do very well with 3 honest justices for a while. But I'm talking about impeaching any president who becomes an aggressor and a war criminal. And I learned from Noam Chomsky in a class at MIT in 1976 that every president from 1946 to 76, post-World War II, was a war criminal, would have been hanged if the Nuremberg standards had been used. And since 76, it's gotten even worse. Every president. So now, a new president comes in, Trump, within a couple of weeks, he's a war criminal. Biden, well, he was arguably a war criminal from 2011 when he went along with the destruction of Libya. But so he arguably was a war criminal the day he came in. But within a few weeks of his becoming president for the first time, he became a war criminal too. I never want to see another war criminal run for or become the president. So we have to establish a principle throughout our political system. You commit war crimes, you get impeached. And if President Harris, after Biden is impeached, if President Harris starts committing war crimes, for example, continues the war in Ukraine, continues having our troops operating in Syria and Iraq illegally, impeach her too. And then the next one, and then the next one, until they get the message. You impeach war crimes, you commit war crimes, commit aggression, maintain a war of aggression, proxy war against Russia. You get impeached. You're gone. That's one of my main objectives for running.
Absolutely. And I do want to go to Zula, and then I'm going to open it up to the same question to or not the same question, because now you're a South African activist. Are you in South Africa now? Can she hear me? Okay. And so can you tell us right now? Okay, so then I do have a couple of specific questions then about the African continent. How is the United States military in particular viewed? Like, we can speak about how bad it is and all of that stuff, but I'm curious to hear from somebody from another continent and just the destruction that the United States military has brought to the entire planet and humanity. Like, how is it viewed in your space over there, in your spaces over in South Africa?
How the United States military is viewed in South Africa?
Right, like the United States
feel
military,
that,
the NATO. I'm sorry, I know it's a sound delay. I'm sorry. So, yeah, and NATO, if you want to include that too.
Yes. So in the African continent, we are we're very firm. We stand firm in the fact that we'd like to have African solutions to African problems. However, with the global economy and with the global political climate, no continent, no country works in silos. And so we have some form of, some form of infiltration, some form of, contribution from the global leaders. And so we feel that, some things are just imposed on the African continent. African people at some point usually do not have a strong say against any form of, military impact in the continent, any form of global leaders having a stand on African issues. It's generally just, the top leadership having their own discussions, and usually African governments, leave everything to the first world leaders. And I feel like they do not stand on their convictions very strongly. I'm not sure as to why. It probably has to do with the whole the trade relations. It has to do with the power, you know, absolute power being granted to a specific a nation based on a state of economy, the state of being a first world country or a second world country. And so usually the African voice is usually not very well represented, not very listened to as much as how we would like to be represented on a global scale. And so usually, the first world has dominance over the African continent. They have, greater influence in terms of directing the decision making, directing the forms and ways in which peace is achieved, and ways in which we would like peaceful demonstrations in terms of fighting for transformation, but you have leaders with their different points of views as to how to seek a resolution in a country. And so those are my viewpoints in terms of how the African people and the African continent views the first world country, in that African lives really do not have a strong voice. African leaders really do not stand on their convictions. It's like they don't have belief in terms of the fact that the African continent can actually have some form of influence in driving global change, driving the peace in terms of the global political climate. And so I feel like African leaders should actually have more conviction, should have more urgency and agency when it comes to matters around politics and the global scale, and in terms of having an influence on whether nuclear weapons should be used in terms of achieving peace amongst nations. And I feel that, you know, the stance is that nuclear weapons are not the solutions. Weapons in general should not even be used. It should not even be a discussion that, you know, we should be using weapons in terms of dealing with human rights issues that deal with humanity. And so those are my viewpoints around the military, around gun violence, around the use of police brutality or the military brutality when it comes to driving change. I mean, we've seen with how the apartheid in the country had, you know, a brutal effect in terms of the use of the military, the police brutality, and it resulted in, you know, many losing their lives over the course of time in fighting for change and fighting for a new South Africa, democratic South Africa. And so again, here locally, you could see that the African voice doesn't really have a strong influence or a strong say when it comes to driving change in terms of achieving a peaceful resolution. Yes, Nelson Mandela tried their very best with his, you know, leaders and fellow comrades, but he also at some point also almost resorted to, you know, having military weapons in terms of driving change, but eventually peaceful demonstrations were more a peaceful resolve in terms of fighting for change. And so that's what I believe in terms of, you know, when it comes to achieving peace amongst nations or peace in countries, is that the military shouldn't really be so much involved, because once you put the military forward, then it's a sign that, you know, there's going to be some form of human rights violations. There's going to be some form of you know, deaths, humanity losing lives, and you know, some being marginalized and some voices being silenced, and particularly Black voices.